Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Sam Menzie. We have a great show for you today. All the topics today are going to be about the trade deadline. They're going to be separated in different ways, which you'll see. But yeah, it's trade deadline season in baseball nowadays. It does end tomorrow at 6 o'clock, so I'm very excited for that. There's been a ton of trades going on, so I'm going to go over all of them, give my predictions as well for the trades that have not happened. I'm sure trades will happen while I'm on air as well, so we'll be talking about all that, and let's get into the show for today. Before we get into all this, though, I'd like to ask you to please like and follow the show. We do get a number of questions from viewers to ensure that your question does get read in the air. Please use the link, gsmcpodcast.net. Relators love the show. Relators mean a lot, so thank you so much for that. And let's get into the show for today. All right, as I said, our entire show today is going to be about the trade deadline, focusing on that. And I'm very, very excited to end up, talking about it with you guys, giving my personal thoughts on it, and just going over all the trade deadline stuff. So let's get into it. So I've been a baseball fan my entire life. I'm 18 years old. I've watched 18 trade deadlines. I've really been into it maybe for 6 or 7 years now, fully into the trade deadline, reading rumors, seeing everything. And I can never remember a deadline where we've been this active before the actual day of the deadline. Thursday really, deals started going down relatively significant. Friday after my show, Zach Eflin got traded, which we'll talk about as well, which is a big trade. Over the weekend, of course, I wasn't on air. Huge trades went down, which of course we'll talk about as well. So there's been a ton of movement for this trade deadline before the day, which has really never happened before, I'd say, in my time at least. This amount of significant trades, and I wanted to go over all of them, so let's get into it. So the first segment we are going to be talking about is going to be dedicated to what I believe is the biggest and most significant trade of the entire deadline so far, which is Isaac Paredes being traded to the Chicago Cubs. We'll also be tying this fully with the Rays as well, who of course have had a crazy deadline. I also did talk about on Friday, Randy Arozarena being traded to Seattle, which obviously was a huge, significant trade. So if you want to see my thoughts on a different Rays trade, please go ahead and check out that. But yeah, this is one of the most shocking trades I've seen in a long time as a baseball fan, and let's get into it. So, going into this deadline, Isaac Paredes was, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, the best player available. I'm not really counting Tarek Skubal because I don't really think he's available, quote unquote. I just think these are rumors that really aren't going to be ever true. So, at least the best position player available, I think he's better than Luis Robert, and that's what I clearly thought. Paredes has consistently been one of the best third basemen in baseball, one of the best hitters in baseball since getting traded from Detroit to Tampa Bay a few years ago. And I had heard a lot of rumors that the Rays were planning on trading him or were likely to trade him, even from Jeff Passan himself, who of course is one of the most reliable people out there, probably the most. And my thought always was, no way. I'm sorry, I understand what the Rays are doing. They don't think this year is really going to be competitive for them, so they want to rebuild for next year, which is fine. That's why he traded Arozarena, even with the years of control. I went over more of that, why that makes sense. If you might have the video if you want to see that. But I was like, Paredes is a superstar type player. You look at his hitting stats, you look at how consistently good he has been since getting there to Tampa Bay. I just thought there was no way they would trade him with how good of a player he was. And not only did they trade him, they traded him to the Cubs. The Cubs, who made it very clear that they were not buying at this deadline, and then get the best player available, which blew my mind. So I wanted to just go over all this and just give my thoughts on it. So first off, thoughts on the trade for the Cubs. My reaction to this was insane. I was absolutely shocked. Now, I want to say that actually over the weekend I was in Florida, doing personal things, I'll say, and I actually saw 2 Rays games. So I saw Isaac Paredes' last at bat and last game as a Ray, so that was nice for me. And then in the parking lot of my hotel right after I got home from the Tampa Bay Rays game, I saw he got traded, and my reaction was insane. First of all, wow, I can't believe they traded him, and second of all, they traded him to who? They traded him to the Cubs, which was crazy because, again, I thought the Cubs were selling, and it seems like they are. They just got Paredes. So why this trade makes sense for them is because Paredes is not a rental, of course. He is under control until 2028. You have 3 full years of him on your team. So even though the Cubs are selling for this year, they're saying, you know what, even though this year hasn't really gone our way, we don't envision ourselves being competitive this year. In the years in the future, we will be. And we want a superstar type player to take us to the promised land, and we think Isaac Paredes can be that type of player. And guess what? I agree with them. I think this was a fantastic trade by the Cubs to be able to capitalize on this and getting Paredes. Even though you are selling, you're not selling and buying, of course, getting the top player in the trade market. So just an incredible trade, in my opinion, by Chicago. Be able to get Paredes just out of nowhere. I mean, all the rumors we'd heard was the Yankees and the Dodgers were kind of in a bidding war for him, which I never really believed because I didn't really think it made sense. I didn't really think the Rays would want to trade Paredes to a direct rival in the Yankees. I just never thought either of those teams made much sense. But the Cubs were just a team I did not have at all on my radar for a Paredes trade. Just incredible, and wow, what a trade here. Now the Cubs in this trade did give up, first of all, Christopher Morel. He was the main part of this trade, who has been their third baseman for a little while now, a former top prospect for them, who has been very inconsistent coming to the big leagues, and he was traded to Tampa Bay. Now, a lot of people are saying that the Rays fleeced the Cubs in this trade. I'm seeing a big outcry on social media, like how could the Cubs do this? Why would they trade Morel? All this kind of stuff, and I don't get why. I kind of think the furthest from that. I love this trade for Chicago, and I'm not really a big fan of it for Tampa. Now, of course, Tampa will probably, make all the guys they got in this trade future superstars because I said this, but I'm just not seeing it. So, going back to Paredes on the Cubs, the one thing I've talked about with the Cubs is that I really think they are missing a superstar type player. I thought that's really been their problem for the past 2 or 3 years now when they've been trying to be competitive. And I think getting that in Paredes is a great sign. I mean, I think Paredes can be that type of player that you build your team around with how good he's been. I feel like a lot of people don't really realize how fantastic Isaac Paredes is of a player. I mean, again, since coming to Chicago, he's been one of the best third basemen in all of baseball, maybe the best behind Jose Ramirez, who is consistently just always the best. It's insane. I mean, since coming to Tampa Bay, he had a 116 weighted runs created up less than his first year, 137 last year, and then 131 this year so far. That's incredible level of consistency. He doesn't play the greatest third base, but he's not awful over there. He has versatility. He can play first base pretty well. I think you can stick him in the outfield if you need. Not really his main position, but if you need to, you can. So Paredes is one of the best consistent pure hitters in all of baseball, and I love this move for them. I think it was a great job by the Cubs to be able to get the superstar type player I think they've been missing for a long, long time. And going into next year, you now have someone to build around. You now have someone in that lineup. You can say, okay, you know what? This is our superstar type player. I mean, you have a lot of good players in that lineup. Don't get me wrong. Cody Bellinger, Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, Ian Happ. But none of them, to me, are as good as Isaac Paredes. So being able to get him, being able to get a guy that you can build your team around, look to for the future, for the next 3 years, you have control of him. And, who's to say you won't give him a long-term contract soon? Or even longer than that, you can point to him and say, this guy's going to be in the middle of our lineup. He's going to be the guy we build around, the guy we market around, and I love this trade for them. Now, going to the negative side of it, there is some question marks about how he fits in Wrigley Field. He is the biggest pull hitter in all of baseball, which is one of the reasons why he's been so consistently good. But with how Wrigley Field is structured, he would have minus 13 home runs from this year if he played his whole year in Chicago. So you would have 13 less home runs, a better way of putting it. So that is a problem there with the ballpark. And yes, that's a problem. I would agree with that. I think that is something you have to take into consideration. But I think Paredes is such a good player that even with that, I'm sure he'll just hit extra base hits more. And you also play half the season on the road, so it's not exactly like you're in Chicago 162 games a year. So still a fantastic player. I think that's something that, is something you have to think about, but overall shouldn't deter you from acquiring a player as fantastic as Paredes. Now, going to the Rays side, they are acquiring Christopher Morel and 2 other prospects. The main one is Hunter Bigby, who we'll get to in a second. But Morel is a former top prospect with this Cubs team. Tried to latch on to the Cubs' third base job for the past few years now. Really has had inconsistent offensive numbers, and now has been traded to Tampa. Now, to be honest, I don't love this trade for Tampa. I think they could have done a lot more for Paredes. I think that Morel has a lot of potential. I think Hunter Bigby will be a very good reliever in the future. I think the other prospect as well, who they got, will end up being very solid. But I just think for a player of Paredes' caliber, and so many teams trying to win this year, I think that you could have gotten more. And apparently Morel has been a guy they've wanted for a long time. They asked for him in the Tyler Glasnow trade talks in the offseason when they almost traded him to Chicago. So I guess they have had their eye on Morel, and they have maybe one of the best player development systems in all sports. So, I think you could look at it that way. But at the same time, I think that there could have been more, even with Morel. And Hunter Bigby, again, I think will be a very quality, high leverage reliever. But more than that, I just don't think so. I think that's solid, but getting an okay player like Morel, who has question marks wherever he's going to play, who hasn't been great on offense and has been horrific on defense, I think is a question mark. So I don't love this trade for Tampa, but also I get what they're doing. Now, the Rays' future is a little weird, as, of course, you're trading now Randy Arozarena, Zach Eflin, and Isaac Paredes, 3 main pieces of your team this year, 3 of your best players, but the Rays are so good that they have replacements for all these guys. I mean, Paredes, you just slot maybe the best prospect in all of baseball in Junior Camarino at the third base next year, or maybe even at the end of this year. You put him there. You have Chris Morel, who looks like he'll be playing left field with the Rays, which I think is a very good place for him. You just slot him in to replace Randy Arozarena. And then Jason Adam, who you just traded, who I'm also going to be talking about, you slot Hunter Bigby in there. So, and also Zach Eflin, who you traded, you have so many guys coming off the injured list. You have Jeffrey Springs coming off the injured list, Drew Rasmussen, Shane McClanahan. You, of course, already have Ryan Pepio, Shane Baz, Taj Bradley. The Rays have so much depth that even with trading all these guys who are great, you have the replacements on the roster. So as much as they're giving up for this year, their future looks as bright as ever, and I think they could be even better going into next year. So, just an incredible organization. They are. The way they thread the needle and be this competitive, consistent year in and year out without having the financial resources to do it is incredible, man. What a job by them. I do also want to talk about the Jason Adam trade for a second. They traded him to San Diego. I mainly want to talk about it because they got Dylan Lesko back, one of the top 100 prospects in all of baseball consistently, a top 15 draft pick by the Padres a few years ago, a guy who I have loved in the Padres system for a little while, coming out of college as well, high school I believe actually, when he was coming out of the draft, wherever it was. He has struggled this year a lot in the minor leagues, yes, but I think this is a great get by Tampa. They have developed prospects like this a lot in their future, a lot in their past, and I think getting Lesko was a huge get for them. Now, I'm not sure why San Diego traded Jason Adam for Dylan Lesko. Adam's really good. You now have a absolute shutdown back end of the bullpen of Jason Adam, Jeremiah Estrada, and Robert Suarez. A pitcher pitches 6 good innings. The game's pretty much over with that 7, 8, 9 combo, but trading Lesko for him is crazy, and I think it's only really heighten the price for rental relievers right now, which we'll talk about in our next segment as well. So that is the first segment here, really talking about the Rays altogether, going over all their trades, going over Isaac Paredes being traded to the Chicago Cubs. And yeah, just crazy trade, something I did not expect. And yeah, we'll be going to our second segment now, which is going to be talking about the Mets and their trade deadline and all the moves they have made, the injury they've had, which I'm going to talk about with Kodai Senga, of course. I'm sure you've heard by now. So yeah, going over all that, and we'll be seeing you after the break. So thanks, and bye.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. 'Cause everybody in the world